the money is broken. And so your whole life up to this point has been built on a lie.
Everything is a lie.
Everything is a lie because...
The food pyramid is a lie.
No, but you structure... Money is at the heart of everything. Money is at the root of every decision, directly or indirectly. The way that you think about having a family, think about setting up your life, think about having a house, a career, it's all linked to the money. And so if your money is corrupted, every decision is corrupted. I think a large swathe of society feels like they work ever harder and their quality of life doesn't go up or declines.
We're good. We're on. Joe, good to see you.
Great to be here, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Bring it in a bit closer because you're a soft speaker.
I am very soft speaker, yeah.
Thank you for doing the conference. Did you enjoy it?
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. Last year I was there in the crowd, and to think 12 months later I'd be doing the opening talk was a dream come true and just surreal, to be honest. But it was so nice just to be back with so many Bitcoiners in real life, and exhausting 3 days.
Well, look, it's good to see you. I don't cover Bitcoin much on the show anymore, although some people listen and be like, you're always talking about it, but you know the background, it was a Bitcoin show and now it's not. But you're one of the people I really did want to talk to. I thought the film was great, and it was interesting. We were driving down today, and I listen to Radio 5 most mornings, and they're often talking about big issues in society. And every morning these days it is problems with the schools, problems with the NHS, cost of living crisis, wealth gap. It's just problem. And it was this morning when I was driving down, because I know I was going to talk to you, I was like, this is what Joe's talking about.
Yeah. All has the same root cause, and no one's talking about it. It's, when you're listening to radio shows or you're watching the TV, even on some of the shows which are probably the most highbrow, it's as Larry Lepard says, it's like they're discussing the colour of the curtains while the house is on fire. It's like, it really doesn't matter. You're talking about downstream issues, which you could only fix temporarily, even if you could fix them. But even if you fix them, they're going to break. They're all from this central cause that everybody just ignores because of a mixture of complexity and a combination of familiarity and a disinterest.
I'm not sure on the disinterest. I think there's definitely an interest in money. I think it's more on the complexity of the issue that people struggle with to fully understand. It's like when they have this Gary Economics at the moment discussing money, and he talks about, and I think he's right on the problem. I think we all agree on the problem. I think he's right, but his solution is always more government, more taxation. Yeah. And I don't think people really truly understand money and the nature of money and the nature of where government gets its money from and how the government distributes its money, how that causes such insidious problems in society.
Yeah, it's a combination of cause and effect here. And the list of problems that people experience in their own lives, whether it's the wealth inequality, obesity, addiction, cost of living crisis, all of these things are viewed as independent issues that require solving. And people evaluate them as problems, absolutely, and you should do things to try and solve them, especially if they impact your life directly. But they're caused by something else. And so when you have Gary's economics, coming out and talking about the wealth inequality and the solution being more taxes, I can sympathise with the evaluation of an issue, because 100% that's an issue. But he hasn't zoomed out enough. It's like, why is that issue there? It's not because people are not getting taxed enough. It's because the system's fundamentally broken. The money is corrupted, which causes the wealth inequality. You don't solve that by taxing people more. You just degrade society and you drive a race to the bottom. There's no solution there. It's great for selling books.
Great for selling books.
But there's no solution there. This is not a us versus them problem. It's an everybody versus the central bank problem. It's
kinda. I don't know if you remember my slides at the conference, but what I spoke about is if you're an asset holder, this is great. And okay, sorry, apologies. It's great financially. It's not great because society around you is crumbling.
I would even argue it's not great financially because it's the frame of reference in which you're measuring something.
Okay.
There's a distinction to draw here between, Gary would very helpfully split society into the rich and the poor, which is too black and white for this. Society is a spectrum. And even, within the poor, you have the destitute, you have the less well off, you have the poor, you have different categories, and it's the same for the middle class and same for the wealthy, etc., etc. It is a spectrum, not a line down the middle here. And so everybody can always point at somebody further along the spectrum and say, I'm disadvantaged versus you. You need to share more with me. Right? You can always do that. It's just however finely you cut it. But at one end of the spectrum, you have those connected to the money printer, which is the difference. And the wealthy are not necessarily directly connected to the money printer. You can own assets, see those assets go up when measured in fiat currency, but not become wealthier. So you own assets, more money is printed, those assets go up in value when measured in the thing that is now more plentiful. So your number goes up on a piece of paper, but your share of the pie goes down. You are also being stolen from. You just don't realize it. And it's those people who are closer to the money printer who are able to effectively accumulate that wealth balance in excess of the rate of the money printing, which are the politically connected. I think there is a slight difference.
That's fair. And I think broadly across society, people recognize there is a problem right now.
Yeah.
I think people recognize that. I think the rise of reform is a reflection on that, going from essentially a new party to leading certain polls is people want something different. And I don't think they know exactly why they want something different. I think they do. But at the same time, it's not necessarily going to bring the change we need. I think what would be really useful today is that there are going to be people who know there's a problem. We just put out this show with Catherine McBride talking about terminal decline. It would be to really drill into what the problem is with the money. Try and explain it to the people listening now who are like who maybe are open-minded to this, who are, okay, explain to me what is going on. Why is everything falling apart?
Okay, well, this may be a long answer.
Well, good, because you can hear my throat still not great, and you can do all the talking.
Drink. So I think the core issue with the money is that it can be changed. So to use the abstraction in the video, which we'll hopefully post a link to, and people, if they're interested, can come watch it and then share it with others, is that there is a big red button that exists, which allows the government to change aspects of the money as and when they choose to. And I'll try and use non-technical terminology for any of these things. And when I say government, I sort of interchangeably mean government and central bank, because the central bank gets this mandate from
all government.
From the government. They're independent, but they're not really. Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Now, many people haven't really questioned what money is. And it's sort of the defining question of our time, because we think we know what money is. We have it in our pocket, we have it in our bank account, we spend it, etc. But when you really think about what money represents, and we can go right back to the start here. It's like, if we're in a barter economy before any form of medium of exchange exists, and you've got a chicken that you've raised and I've got some carrots that I've sown and then grown. Both of those products represent our economic energy in all the contributions we've made to our skills, our time, in various combinations, but they represent economic energy. Now, you may want some carrots and I might want some chicken, and we can swap those. And we might say,
It's a lot of carrots I want for that chicken.
well, yeah, they're great carrots. But we agree to swap them. And that is an exchange of economic energy. Now,
what do you mean by that?
Because you, in order to produce that chicken as a good, you've had to expend time, energy, innovation, thought, effort into that.
It's my output.
It's your output. It's your representation of your time and energy, right? In different forms. But everybody has their own things that they produce. Now, in a barter economy, you'd be looking to swap those things in different quantities with each other, but super inefficient, because you probably don't want the carrots, right? You might want something else. So over time, you end up introducing something that everybody can agree on as a medium of exchange, so that I can buy the chicken from you, but not for carrots, but for some, rare seashells, for example, because we're on an island and these things are super rare. But they're small, they're portable, we can use them as a medium of exchange, people can carry them around. Right? And then you've then got something which is a representation of economic energy. But it's a representation of economic energy because it took some time, because people value them, because they're rare, because they're hard to find, hard to create more of. They become that store of economic energy.
I always actually say to people, cigarettes in prison are a great currency.
Yes. But in any given currency, you have factors which make it a better or a worse currency. So cigarettes in prison are great because they're available. They're not particularly durable. They'll gradually decay. But they have other uses, can be smoked and things. So you tend to use a currency which makes sense in your environment. Or a money. I'm using money and currency interchangeably for now, but I will draw a distinction slightly later. You use what's in your environment. Now, over time, I mean, this is like the history of money, but hopefully I will get back to the original question. Over time, as these communities interact with each other, one community might use shells, another community uses, ornate beads or something like this. Over time, as they interact with each other, the harder money wins. Because let's say one island community is visited by another island community, and they've got lots of these shells. And they arrive and they start giving all the shells out, buying all the chickens and disappearing with them. Islanders are just left with all these shells, and they realize, actually, those shells are super easy to produce. They were just hard to produce for us. And so that money is no longer a good form of money, and they move to something else, right? And it might be now the ornate beads, and then the ornate beads are actually easy to produce for a more advanced civilization, so they replace it with silver. And then silver is replaced with gold. And so over time, you move to harder and harder money, something which represents a higher quality of economic energy.
I think this is hard for some people to get their head around, because they didn't live in the time where they lived on an island where a shell was a currency. And even gold, I think gold is probably the easiest to understand, but even that's difficult because most people haven't used gold as currency.
I know. This is what has disassociated money that represents economic energy to what we have today. That link has been broken, and I'll explain why that's happened and how that's happened and how that's become normalized and why that's the problem. That's the start of the problem. And so harder money wins. And so eventually, as society starts to interact with each other, you tend to agree on the hardest form of money for the general use of commerce and storage of economic energy, and that has been gold. So in the Middle Ages, everyone's got gold coins and things.
5,000 years or something? Yeah,
for an extended period of time. But it's varied in different parts of the world because, island communities were cut off for very long periods of time, for example. But then you end up with gold, and then the problem with gold is, how do you know if it's real? If I have a lump of gold and I pay you with a lump of gold, how do you know that's actually gold? There's no way of quickly verifying it. It could be, as we've seen in the central bank vaults, it could just be, an alloy with the same density painted with gold that looks like gold bars. And it's very, very hard to actually validate these things. But then when people are carrying money around, they're carrying little gold coins, which then get chipped away as people scrape them off, melt them down, and create more gold coins. So it's fallible, it's fairly portable, but it's not very secure. Like, it's a bearer asset. It's a bearer asset. But gold is still energy money, economic energy money, because all the gold that's ever been mined is still in existence. And to mine more requires energy. So you have to expend real energy to go and get gold out of the ground to increase the supply. So even in a world where everyone is using gold as a money and a currency and paying in gold, there's nothing else. The supply is still increasing, but the supply is increasing at a rate limited by energy in the economic equation of, does it make sense to spend a certain amount of gold on the energy required to mine more gold? Often it doesn't, right? But the amount of gold on the planet is effectively infinite. We just haven't accessed it yet. The gold in the universe is absolutely infinite. We just haven't accessed it yet. All the gold we've ever mined is in use today. But what happens is the gold price goes up, and now it's more efficient for people to excavate more gold. But we'll come to that in a second. But gold still is that energy representation. Right?
I don't think people think of it as energy representation, though.
I know, but this is why I'm trying to build it up from those first principles, because that's what money is. It's economic energy. Going from that very first barter interaction, it's that connecting it back to what it should be. Because when you see what it is, you realize it's not right. And so, in that situation where we've got gold coins, because people don't want to carry gold around, it's insecure. You need somebody to secure these things for you. And so what tends to happen is gold gets centralized, and for convenience, people give you bits of paper that represent the gold because it's just much easier. Because of the transport, the portability constraints with gold and the verification issues with gold, it gets replaced with a representation of gold. And to start with, people think, it's fine, because I can just take my bit of paper back to the vault, back to the bank, and say, here you go, you can have the piece of paper back, give me my gold. And you have that convertibility. And so this makes total sense because it unlocks commerce, it unlocks the ability for people to borrow, etc., etc. But then over time, you have fractional reserve banking, which comes in, and I'll leave that for now, right? But maybe we can come back to this, because this is like steroids under the problem. But over time, the gold in the banks gets centralized, and then the bank realizes that it can just issue actually more paper. And we'll dig it. I'm sort of talking about fractional reserve banking without explaining it, and I'll come back to it later, just to draw the distinction. And they start to issue more paper, and then people forget there was ever a link to the gold because no one ever asks for the gold. And then where we've got to now is, actually, you know what, I'm going to explain fractional reserve banking, because making this, I've tried to avoid it. But
I think that was one of the most interesting transitions in money in society. Because like I say, I think it's hard for people to understand the idea that there was a time where people on islands were buying things with shells. Yeah. That was the money. I think it's hard to conceptualize that. I think it's hard for people to even understand that, in the Wild West, people were buying and trading things with gold. Yeah. But they understand money. But that period of time where we had the creation of banks, and the banks would hold the gold and give you paper notes to use as money. Yeah. That's still hard for people to conceptualize, because how many people have been to a bank and said, here's my gold, can I have some paper money? But we've all lived through that paper bit afterwards.
Yes, exactly. So I will tackle fractional reserve banking. Yeah. I've tried to avoid it, but I don't think there's a way to explain this properly. So I take my gold coins to the bank, but they're convertible for the paper I get in return. Now, the bank can just hold those gold coins, or it can lend those gold coins out. Because everyone's put their gold coins in the bank, they realize that people very rarely come in and ask for their gold again, because it's a pain. They just keep the paper. And so we've got all this gold in the vaults, and we can issue as much paper as we want. Why don't we start issuing more paper against the gold? And so more and more paper comes into existence relative to the gold in the vaults. And that's fine. Credit expands. The economy seems to be growing. But then something will happen. There'll be the stock market will fall or something like this, and you will then get people panicking, and they'll start wanting their gold back. And they take their pieces of paper to the bank, and the bank realizes there isn't enough gold in the vaults to give everyone the gold back. And so they're effectively insolvent. And then you've seen this happen time and time again. And this leads to the creation of the central banks. The banks appeal to the government and say, if we go bust here, it's gonna ruin everything.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
And that happened. We had Nick Carter wrote a really good article once about the free market for money, where the free market, and you had different banks issuing different notes. And if it was like now, there would be the Lloyd's pound and the NatWest pound.
Yeah.
And they were all independent of each other, and that was good because with this free market of money, you had the bank had to build trust, otherwise they would go bust.
Yeah, but then what happens is you get over leveraged. Eventually, somebody gets over leveraged.
There's always a greedy person.
There's always a greedy person, but this is what happens with the horror show that is fractional reserve banking. And then they appeal to the government to create a central bank that can sit behind everyone else and print a central currency. So there's no individual paper notes from any of the individuals. There's no NatWest pound. There's no HSBC pound. There is just the British pound. And all the gold is then moved from the individual banks to the central bank. So your bank doesn't hold gold anymore. But everyone now uses a central currency that is exchangeable for gold. If you are a certain person or if you're a foreign country, you can do this. The restrictions then get put in place for the individuals. But then over time, the gold just sits in the vaults and people forget the gold is even there. Everything is just numbers. It's just notes. But then you get the credit cycle happening again, but on a national level. More money is brought into existence relative to the amount of underlying economic energy that is there until something breaks again. And you saw this, and I'll give you, I know this is more UK focused, but we'll talk about the US because the US sets the direction for the world. But post 1944 with the Bretton Woods Agreement, at the end of the Second World War, it put the US at the center of the global financial system. And so the US was pegged to gold, and all the other currencies are pegged to the dollar. And then they enforced this, ensuring that everyone else used US dollars as their reserve asset, and the US held a lot of gold because it also accumulated it during the Second World War to keep it away from what's happening in various parts of the world. But the linking of the dollar to gold was meant to be a formal exchange for other central banks. So the French could call up or the British could call up and say, look, you can have your dollars back, send us the gold. But no one really did. It's a bit like the citizens going to their bank and saying, can I have the gold back? It rarely happened. And what happened in the US is that they started just printing more and more money because they realized no one ever asks for the gold. We can just print more and more. And then the French started to ask questions, say, well, how are you financing these various wars?
Can we have our gold back?
Can we have our gold back, please? And then so the gold, the amount of dollars in the system was constantly going up. The amount of gold the US held was then constantly going down as people were withdrawing it. And then 1971, Nixon said, right, gold convertibility is gone. Okay. And that is the break then the formal break. There'd been
You know Ben's website, right?
Ben.
You've never seen What the Fuck Happened in
Oh,
1971?
yeah. I didn't know it was Ben created it.
We
But
should,
yeah,
we should
brilliant
bring that up.
website.
You know what? We should bring that up just so
Yeah.
people see this, and anyone listening should go onto this website, because one of the things I was going to say to you is one of the issues I'm having is people like problem. Everything's broken, nothing's working, and I'm like, well, the problem's the money. Oh, I don't want to talk about that. I'm like, it's literally the central. This is the problem. You need to go down this rabbit hole and learn why money is the problem. And by the way, we have the solution. No, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to hear about the problem. And I don't want to hear about the solution. I just want to talk about what's happening to me. But
That's what I meant by disinterest.
well, I don't think people. The problem is with money is that, as a kid, we first discover money when our parents take us to the shop, and it's like, you want a Kinder Egg? And it's probably like 20p when I went. Here's 20p. You get a Kinder Egg. I've got this thing. This bit of metal gets me that. And that's all I've known for 40 years. And suddenly you're going to come along and say, there's this other thing, there's this entirely new form of money that was designed by somebody we don't know who exists, that exists on a blockchain, that has 8 decimal places. I just cannot get my head around it.
Yeah.
It's too much. Go away. Fuck off. But I want people to see this, and I want people to go onto this website just so they understand what happened in 1971 when Nixon essentially... When he took the world off the gold standard, the US off the gold standard, he took the world off the gold standard.
Took the world off, yeah.
Took the world off the gold standard. And so just first couple of charts here. If you're listening, I'm just explaining the chart. 1971, we've got a chart here for growth in productivity and hourly compensation since 1948. So there's a red and a yellow line, and they track productivity and compensation in terms of pay. They're linked, they're matched. They're growing at the same rate. 1971, we come off the gold standard. By 2017, productivity has increased 246% and compensation by 115%. There's a clear break when we come to the gold standard. But as you scroll down, Connor, it's like everything.
Everything changes.
Income gains widely shared. What else is there?
I mean, there's dozens and dozens of charts. You can spend hours on that website.
And they all start at 1971. They
Yeah.
all stand there. So people should go on this website and just if you think there's a problem, just go and look at this website. It will show you what happens without the gold standard.
Yeah, but even so that was the formal break between economic energy being represented as money and something else, right? Something else that you could create for free that wasn't tied to the economic energy. And even prior to 1971, even when you're on the gold standard, you're still weakening that link. Unless you have one-to-one exchange between your currency and the gold you have in the vaults, you're still undermining the quality of that energy, that economic energy. So 71 is just when they broke the link. It was already deteriorating up to that point, and this cycle repeats throughout history. But since 1971, we've been on the Fiat standard, where the US is able to print as much money as it wants.
And
As much
is printed.
And here's where I'll draw the distinction: print as much currency as it wants, not money. It's not. There is no money there. There's no economic energy. It's printing currency not linked to something. They don't have to do work to bring currency into existence. And so we're in this whole new world, but it's not new for everybody because it's 54 years old, right?
But the thing is, I've been out to places with high inflation. I've been out to Argentina, Venezuela. I've seen it. It's shit, right? Inflation here historically has been so minimal and so insidious. You just kind of accept it. This kind of like 2% inflation, you suffer it. Only recently when we had like 10%, 15% inflation, people are like, oh shit, something's going on here. But they can get away with a small amount.
They can. They have been.
For a certain period of time.
They have been. It's changing.
Mm-hmm.
It's changing. If you make this mental connection between economic energy and money, you start to see why the current system is fundamentally flawed. Right? Because somebody can print for free what you have to work for. Now, that's fundamentally wrong. Everybody on an individual level knows that is wrong. I have to go and do a day's work to get paid in something that you can print for free with the press of a button. That is wrong.
Well, that makes me think of a meme I saw on Twitter yesterday. I'm trying to remember exactly, but it was like a picture of a guy and it says, you start work at 20, you work for 45 years until you're 65 and you save. And in that period, the government has stolen half of your time. And I don't think people have made that connection, because you call inflation theft.
Yeah.
They haven't realized that they are being stolen from daily by government.
Yes.
This isn't, I mean, some will say taxation is theft, but I think most people accept, like, to run a society, you need some taxation and some government. And I know there are some people who disagree and be losing their shit right now, but inflation itself is direct theft.
Yeah. But inflation is a monetary phenomenon. Only ever a monetary phenomenon. It's because you print more money. Like, we know this from our history books. If you say that to someone, they're like, yeah.
Not everyone even understands that. Not everyone understands inflation. There'll be people who will go to the shops and their groceries are 10-20% more, and they don't understand the real reason why that's happened.
Agreed. So the point I was going to make is, in school, we all learn about what happened in hyperinflation in Germany, right? So they just printed more money and it caused hyperinflation. What we don't connect is to today's world, where we're doing exactly the same thing. It's just not wheelbarrows full of cash in the street. Like, it's a very visible thing. They printed it at such a rate that it destroyed the currency very, very quickly. Right? We're doing that just in slow motion, but we're doing it behind the curtain.
And over a 40-year working career.
Exactly. And like you say, if somebody's stealing 2% a year from you, it can go unnoticed.
Yeah.
And we've reached the point now, since 1971, the fact that it's been 54 years, most people alive today have never known anything else. Certainly people working today have never known anything else. This is just the way it is. But unless you have that anchor to understand what money should represent, then you don't have a clear understanding of how it should be, or what the correct version is today. And really the issue is they have this big red button and they can just print as much money as they want. They can print for free what you have to work for, and it is theft, and it is the biggest issue that we have globally, and it's upstream of absolutely everything else.
Try to remember who said it to me. It might have been somebody said to me, it is the biggest crime that's been enacted on civilization, and we've not seen it happening.
Yeah, and
I'm trying to remember who said it to me.
I'm not sure who said that. But
It might have been Dominic Frisby.
It could well be. But it's worse than you think as well, Peter, because the central bank will tell us inflation is 2% or 3%. They get to measure it. They get to decide on the rules of measuring it. And if prices of certain items go up, they remove them.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so when you put somebody in charge of marking their own homework, they're going to mark it favorably.
No, they're in charge of how much theft can we get away with.
Exactly. Well, 100%. But the theft is bigger than you think. And it's bigger than you think because, one, they're telling you the number is X when the number is really Y. We know when we go to the shops, it's not 2%. The rate of money printing is 8-10% a year compounded. And we see that in the goods in the shops, services. We experience this every day in our lives. But that's assuming prices shouldn't change. Prices should be going down. And people are going to think, why should prices be going down? The natural state of the world is that prices should go down. This is 180 degrees from what people currently assume to be the natural state of the world, because we've lived for 50 years in this fiat era. People are now accustomed to, inflation is this natural phenomenon that just exists, and prices go up a little bit every year, and who knows where it comes from. Absolutely wrong. It's entirely a monetary phenomenon because they're printing money. But if they weren't able to print the money and we had perfect money, let's just say abstract.
Before you get to that, let's properly explain inflation for people so they understand. Let's make the connection between a growing money supply
Mm-hmm.
or a growing base money, whichever you want to use, and why that leads to things going up in price.
Okay, so in the video, I'll link it back to the
we'll put it in the show notes.
I'll link it back to the video. I'll use some of the terminology there. So we're dealing with an island that splits in two, and one side of the island uses perfect money with no big red button, and the other side of the island uses perfect money but has a big red button they can press and change any aspect. Now, Fiatello, who's the guy who runs that side of the island, promises never to press the button, but eventually he does. Right? Because
Why? Why does he press it?
Because it suits him politically. Because he's up for re-election and he's in a deficit. And so the amount of taxes he's collecting is below the amount that he's spending. And so he either has to raise taxes or cut spending to try and balance the budget, or he could press the big red button over in the corner that he promised never to press and print a bit of extra money for the government. And because he wants to get elected, he knows it's going to cost him votes if he raises taxes or cuts spending. It's just easier to press the big red button because no one will know. I press the big red button, I print some extra money, the population don't know, he gets re-elected.
Politicians wouldn't do this, would they?
I mean, it's a far-fetched story, I know. But he presses the button and prints more, and the currency that he uses Fiatellos. So he prints more Fiatellos, and all fiat currencies are just Fiatellos, hence the name. And so more Fiatellos come into existence overnight into the economy, but into the coffers of the government. Right? No one else, just into the account of the government. Now, as the government spends that money, spends those Fiatellos, it goes into the economy. Now, because the amount of Fiatellos has increased from one day to the next, but the amount of goods and services in the economy hasn't changed from one day to the next, the correct price in Fiatellos for all the goods and services in the economy has gone up.
Why?
Why? Because imagine you've got a certain stock of, let's say, housing, right? And then there's a certain amount of Fiatellos. If you double the amount of Fiatellos in the system, why would anybody sell you their house for the same amount of Fiatellos they would have sold the house for yesterday?
Isn't it slightly different from that? Isn't it more like the money gets distributed unevenly and somebody somehow, because of the government putting more money in the economy, they've got a bit more money. It's like, well, I'm going to buy another house. And then demand goes up.
It's a combination of the two.
Right.
It's a combination of the two because even if the money is not reaching the economy, the fact that you know the money exists dilutes the game. And so, imagine a game of Monopoly where we're all playing. One player can take as much money out of the box and put it on the table next to their stack as you want, but all the houses are owned. Everyone can see the money, but the money's not active in the game. No one's any richer, but they can see it. They know it exists, and therefore it affects the prices, even before the money comes into the game. So there is a combination of the two. There's knowledge.
I'm not sure I agree. I don't think most people see the amount of money in the system. I think it's purely a reflection of supply and demand. I think the money goes into the system that increases the demand, which causes the prices to go up. I may be wrong.
I think it's a combination of the two,
okay.
And I'm certainly not saying everybody takes that information and factors it into their pricing, but some people will, because you can make the connection. The money's on the table. Eventually, the money's going to be in the game. The prices will go up, and so it's a combination of the anticipation and the actual action. But it's a combination. The end point is the same.
Yeah.
The end point is the same. You have diluted you've inflated the value of all the assets when measured in the thing that's just been created. You've doubled the amount of Fiatellos, so everything just becomes more expensive when measured in Fiatellos. The economic energy of the things doesn't change, but it's how you measure them that's changed. That's all it is. That's all it is. And this is what we see today. So as the central banks create more money and drive inflation, they actively target and they tell you, our job is to steal 2% a year from you. But they frame it as a positive thing. And the whole economic framework with which we think about economics these days values that 2% as being necessary to the system, which is so unbelievably crazy.
very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
Well, I think it's this, again, it's a bit like with money. Yeah, when we were a kid, all we knew there is government. And all we knew is every 4 or 5 years you have a vote and there's a red party or a blue party. We need government.
Yeah.
I think it's by going through this, you start to detest government. You start to think, hold on, this isn't what I thought government is. This is a mafia, and this is racketeering, and this is theft, and it's crime. That's pretty much how I see government now. It's essentially a crime family.
It is, but I would draw the distinction between the participants in government have not necessarily connected the dots themselves, and so there's a distinction between government, the entity, and that naturally occurs because of the fact the big red button exists.
But if they've not made the connection, they're too stupid to be in government. I've had multiple politicians there, and I've asked, do they know? Do they understand what they're doing? And the answer is some of them do, which means they're evil, and some of them don't, which means they're stupid. But if you're in government and you're not talking up against this, like I say, you're either evil or stupid. Because your job is to understand this. If you're Rachel Reeves, your job is to understand
100%.
that you're the Chancellor. If you borrow more and you drive inflation, that you are stealing from people. If you don't know this, then you're too stupid for the job. And if you know it, you're too evil. That's one of the things, sorry, I'm keep jumping in, but I admire about the Trump administration. They're actually coming out saying, with 36 trillion in debt, we've got to get rid of this. We're coming after student loans. We're doing new trade deals. With 36 trillion in debt.
Well, I agree with those sentiments, specifically when it comes to the Chancellor. Anybody who's specifically focused on that aspect, but I think it's probably too much of a reach to ask every politician to thoroughly understand the financial system if they're coming from different various backgrounds as well.
I disagree.
It's something they should aspire to, but it also is complex, Peter. I mean, this video is basically running it the other way around, helping people understand why today is the way today is from first principles, because running it the other way around is incredibly tough.
I think you're being too kind.
Perhaps I am.
And I agree the whole thing is that there is a complexity to it, but there's also a simplicity to it. Was it Hayek who said inflation is purely a monetary phenomenon? Or was it Friedman?
I think it's Friedman.
That's not a complex thing to understand, is that if you increase the money supply, you're going to drive inflation. Inflation always affects the poorest in society the worst. So that's a very simple concept to understand. Once you understand that, if your goal is not to reduce that, then you are happy making the poor poorer. You're happy with the transfer of wealth from the poorest, the people who need it most, to the richest, the people who need it the least. If you've understood that and you're not working against that, you're fundamentally evil to me. I'm pretty brutal about this.
I think we're coming from the same place. I would say it's. I'm slightly more forgiving of the people on the edges, because it takes time to. People can agree with the statement. It takes time for that to sink in and for them to really understand the cause and effect.
What class of Bitcoin are you in? What year?
2020.
Yeah, it'll come. I'm 2013.
No,
give it 7 years. You'll be like, fuck all these fucking people.
There's certainly a part of me which is like that, but at the same time, trying to explain it and represent the issue and educate people in a way which is probably slightly more neutral, so as try and bring as many people along as possible.
Yeah,
is maybe the needle I'm trying to thread with the way I'm framing these things.
Have you seen the Matthew McConaughey meme? How many years you've been in Bitcoin?
Yeah.
See if you can find that one, Con. I love that.
That's very good.
Because there was a time I was like, shit, I had the long hair, didn't have the Hawaiian shirt, but I was close.
I'm not sure my wife would let me go down that route. I think that would probably be a step too far. But perhaps to come back a little bit, because we were talking about why the world should be naturally deflationary, but we see it as understanding it to be naturally inflationary because of the action of the central banks. And we can do this just very simply, and we do it in the video, because the video is not just explaining where today's issues come from, but it's a primer for free market capitalism, which is just the greatest force for good globally. It's now being vilified in various ways because it gets corrupted and then gets blamed for not working.
There we go. So where are you at?
Oh, there you go.
Joe, you're kind of still 1 or 2.
No, I'm.
Yeah, you are.
Go for a beer, Pete. I'm not 1 or 2.
You are. Look, you're still smart. I've done 3. Yeah, I've done 4. Yeah, I've done 5. I've even done 6. I've been out shooting.
I've seen the pictures. It got you into trouble, didn't it?
Although I've cut my hair off, I don't know, Con, do you think I'm at about 7 or 8? I was looking at a shirt like that in All Saints with Susie the other day. She wouldn't let me get it.
It's probably a good choice.
See, we're going to do this show in 4 years' time. You're going to come in with a shotgun, long hair, and a Hawaiian shirt. You're going to be like, fuck these people.
Let's see.
Oh, sorry, I keep interrupting.
No. It's good. Well, Bitcoin is a journey, but we need to try and bring as many people, help as many people get to the starting line as possible.
Yes, agree.
Because it is the solution, and we can get onto why that is the case. But to satisfy yourself that deflation is the natural state of the world and prices going down is the natural state of the world is something we solve in the video in 2 minutes. Jeff Booth has written a wonderful book called The Price of Tomorrow. And I would encourage anybody who's interested to order that book and read it. The 2 minutes in the video is a super short version of that, and it does Jeff's book no justice whatsoever, but it helps people connect the dots, because these people who are on an island, they initially have nothing and they're just trying to survive. So they're doing the fishing, they're cutting down their own trees for firewood, and they're building their own shelters. That's super inefficient. And they've got perfect money, but no one really trades because they're just sort of scraping survival. But they realize very quickly that, I'm better at fishing, you're better at cutting down trees and making firewood, so we'll just specialize. And we can produce twice the amount in half the time, and now we have excess. And now because I'm fishing, you're cutting down wood, you have to trade with other people to get the other things that you need. And so perfect money comes into existence. But the more productive you become, the more you specialize, the more you focus, the more you can produce in less time, and it's of a higher quality. And so over time, prices are falling because quantity is going up, quality is going up. And then you create excess goods and excess capital, so you can then invest more in your processes, drive further productivity. You can lend me some wood to build a boat, so I can then catch more fish, better quality fish, etc. for everybody. And so technological innovation and human action is naturally deflationary. Prices go down and quality goes up.
Can I give you the real world example of this?
Yeah.
Because I think I've lived it. And it means I'm going to have to talk about Bitcoin, but class of 2013, fucked it up, proper class of 2017. Since then, I've been pretty good at stacking Bitcoin. Because I've been stacking Bitcoin, which is hardest money, and it's benefited me in that it's appreciated in value. What have I done? I've invested, I've built businesses, and I'm constantly looking for new ideas and new business to build because I have this excess capital because I have money which doesn't inflate away. It's very simple.
It is. But you've got two things driving that, Pete. You've got one, it being a 100% efficient economic store of your energy, your economic energy. But you're benefiting from monetization of the asset. And so you have gained, you've got an expanding economic battery there. It's not just a retaining economic battery. So you're benefiting from two directions. And maybe we can talk about monetization slightly later as well, because that links back into what we could think about the future of Bitcoin is relative to everything else. But 100%, you've got something that isn't decaying. And so this free market capitalism basic example shows you that when you have money that does not decay, prices go down, quality goes up, and it lifts the quality of life for everybody. Even the children, the old people, the infirm, people who cannot be productive, they see their quality of life go up, not down. Because the savings they have buy more tomorrow than they do today. They don't need to earn any interest. They don't need to speculate to protect their purchasing power. The purchasing power increases naturally because the prices are falling. And this is, within 60 seconds, we've demonstrated the world should be deflationary. And that's natural.
Jeff has that really good chart. I don't know if you can find it, Connor. There's a chart that shows inflation and deflationary items. You can probably, if you search for inflation chart, TVs and healthcare, you might find it. And he shows there are things that are deflationary. Yeah, deflationary in society.
Massively.
And TVs is always a great example. Yeah. When you compare that to healthcare. Healthcare costs are going up massively. But actually, the TV you get now is about the same price as the TV you bought 5 years ago. But it's infinitely better. It's ultra high definition. It's super thin. And we've managed to maintain deflation in certain categories of items.
Yeah, when the rate of technical innovation can still outstrip the rate of the money printing.
Yeah.
And for that chart, there are two main drivers of that. One is the money printer and the other is regulation.
Huh. Yeah.
Right. Because the example that I the element that I didn't include in that island example is that you're not the only woodcutter and I'm not the only fisherman. There's lots of people and we're all competing to supply the market, which further pushes down the prices. Because if you're more expensive and offering lower quality, I'm not going to buy from you. I'm going to buy from that guy over there. Right? So it's the combination of perfect money and free market capitalism, competition, right? Which drives that natural deflation. Okay. And when you look at that chart, you see all the healthcare, schools, all of these things go up because they're structured.
That's the one.
Yeah, there you go.
So we get it full screen anyway. Okay, so hospital services has had the highest inflation. College tuition fees, college textbooks, medical care services, childcare, nursery, average hourly wages, food and beverage, housing. Cars have stayed about the same. Household furnishing about the same. Clothing about the same. Cell phone services, computers, toys and TVs have all much more affordable.
Yeah,
it's an incredible chart.
It is. And it exemplifies what we're talking about here.
Well, the ones that have inflated the most tend to be human-led services.
Yeah, in areas where there's limited supply, limited competition, or high regulations, and driven by debt.
I love the fact that Jeff is next to it.
Oh yeah, that's perfect, isn't it?
Go on, Jeff.
Perfect. And a lot of those things are in increasing demand because the money is broken. We have a greater level of health crisis. We have a greater level of debt being pushed on everybody. More people are being encouraged to go to university, take out debts because it's a good way to make money, not because it's a rational economic decision. And so these things are a combination of the money printer with technological deflation, with regulatory overviews, and the secondary consequences downstream of the money printer.
I mean,
all in one chart.
Why are we spending more money to have worse health outcomes? Why are we struggling? Why are schools struggling to afford to even teach the kids? All these things come back to the same central point.
Yeah. And you're measuring it in something that they're just constantly printing. And so to come back to that, the central bank is not stealing 2%. They're stealing 2% on top of all the productivity gains we should see naturally through technological innovation. Prices should be declining, let's say 2, 3, 5% a year through technological innovation. And that should be accelerating over time as we become more technologically proficient.
But it's not even that. We also get this massive misallocation of capital. And something I came to understand, the misallocation of capital isn't just financial misallocation, it's time misallocation. It's human misallocation. I saw this. So when I was in Argentina, me and Kurt were out there making this documentary. We had this fascinating dinner where the guy said, everyone in Argentina is a financial director. I was like, what? They said, everyone spends 30% of their time thinking about how they can move their money around to avoid the impact of inflation. Can I get dollars? Can I get US equities? They're spending all their time thinking about, 30% of their time thinking about, how do I protect my wealth? And that's a fascinating thing to think about, because if you're the guy who cuts wood, you really want to spend that 30% of your time cutting wood and not worrying about this issue. So here is a high inflation you think about, and that's happening here now.
Yeah.
And who keeps money in the bank? You have to be a fucking moron to leave money in the bank at the moment. It's like, can I get another house? What can I buy that's going to protect my wealth?
And you've hit on two points here. One is people were fighting to get into dollars, right? Dollars are still going to zero,
Sure.
just slower than the peso. I believe it's the peso in Argentina. Right, so the dollar is viewed just as a better store of value. It's still a terrible store of value. It's just not as bad as what they're using. This is the first thing. And the second thing is, you've just said you wouldn't keep the money in the bank. You would think that would be a controversial statement, but everyone would agree with you. Everyone knows you don't keep money in the bank. They probably don't think about, precisely why, but they know they can't retain their purchasing power through time by keeping money in the bank.
That change has happened over a single generation. My dad did. Well, they would have a building society account, and they would get interest rates of 5%, 6%, maybe 7%. They knew they could keep money in the bank.
But even then, you'll be receiving 5-6%, but the inflation rate will be a lot higher.
Sure.
And so there is no way with the advent of central banking to be able to go out and do a day's work, get paid, and get paid in pounds, paper pounds, and that being a representation of your economic energy, and then retain that over time. It decays. You put it in the bank, even if you get paid a small amount of interest, that interest is below the rate of inflation, and it's also before tax. Right? There's no way to retain that purchasing power. Your economic battery is being drained by design, because of the creation of the central bank, because of the big red button, because the central bank is targeting positive inflation rates. Right? And so what happens is everyone knows they can't keep money in the bank. So what do you do with it? You've got to invest it. You've got to do something. You've got to speculate with it.
You need 10%. The hurdle rate is 10%.
10% a year, right? And so what does that do? It changes your decision making. You can't plan for the future anymore. So what do? You put it in assets. You buy a second house. You buy the stock market. You buy some meme coins. I don't know. Because
but even with that, Joe,
yeah.
even with that, but then you pay a higher stamp duty. Then you have capital gains tax on any appreciation you have.
Yep.
Every single thing you try and do, they still want to steal a bit more.
Yes.
Absolute motherfuckers.
Yeah, because the system itself is insolvent, because it's a debt-based system. Because the central bank has a big red button, it can print as much money as it wants. And what happens over time is, because this effectively enables fractional reserve banking. And so the banking system gets leveraged, as we talked about before. You put a deposit in, you put your gold coins in, and this is slightly different now because, we're not using money, we're using currency now. But you put your gold coins in, they keep, let's say, 10% of the gold coins in the bank. They lend the next person who walks in 90%, 9 of the 10 coins. That person then takes 9 of the 10 coins to the next bank, puts it in. The bank keeps 1 of those and lends out the next 8 to the next person.
Sounds like 2008.
Yeah, but this is fractional reserve banking, and so you end up stacking loans upon loans upon loans, but the actual amount of gold coins at the bottom of the stack is still only 10. But your exposure is now massive, and so if you're keeping a 10% reserve ratio, and 10% is a lot higher than the banking sector has, I think it's 0 in the US now, right? You can make 100. You can make 90 gold coin loans on 10, right? Sorry, that's incorrect. You'd lend. Well, yeah, you can have a 10 times multiplier effectively on your lending.
But you can have multipliers on the multipliers.
Yeah, but these stack over time. And when you get to 0 reserve ratio, you can basically do that ad infinitum. And so you end up with this massive leverage through the banking system. And then what happens whenever there's a downturn, the banks have realized that they are technically insolvent. And so they call the central bank or the government and say, look, you need to bail us out. Because if you don't, all the depositors are going to get wiped out.
Everything will collapse.
And everything will collapse.
Yeah.
And so what the bank then, what the central bank and the politicians do, well, that would mean I'd lose the next election. And so we will bail you out. We will print extra money, either explicitly or via QE, or even, as we've seen, via the creation of bad banks. So a bad bank will be created which sits on the government's balance sheet and will exchange all the bad assets, all the bad loans that you've made to through your loan book. We'll swap them for currency at 100%, and we'll sweep them all the bad loans into the bad bank, which over 10 years will be shown to lose a big chunk of value. But that now sits on the government, and it's papered over by printing money. So you've socialized the losses there amongst the entire population because you've just printed more fiatellos, right? Whereas the banks are now left with a clean balance sheet again to do the
Start
same
the party again.
to do the same thing, because they know when the times get tough, they call up the government and say, we're going to go bust, the depositors are going to lose their money, and the same thing happens again. But the added thing is, each time the weakest die, the weakest banks die. But they don't die, they get rolled into the bigger banks. And so each time this happens, you get a smaller number of banks remaining who become even more centrally important to the economy. More powerful. And so you end up with more centralization, more money printing, more leverage, and ultimately just debasement because you're printing more fiatellos, which then causes inflation to go up even further. And this is a never-ending cycle because it's a debt-based system.
It's a debt-based system which is underpinned by political ambition. It's political ambition which forces people to essentially lie and buy votes because they don't believe the public will accept the truth. And so political ambition drives the destruction of money. So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com.
Yes, but they can only act on that ambition because they have a big red button.
Sure.
If you don't have a big red button, you don't have the third option. The only two options you have is raise taxes or cut spending. That's it.
Imagine you had a big red button in your home.
Yeah.
Do you remember, how old are you-ish?
I'm 42.
Yeah, okay, similar age. Do you remember that program, Round the Twist, when we were kids? It was the Australian one.
Yes, yeah.
So every episode, something weird would happen, right?
Yeah.
So I remember the episode, the guy had this box in his room and he could put something in it and it would duplicate it. And he was like, this is cool. So obviously he did money. But the problem is everything, when it was duplicated in there, would come out reversed. So if I put this text in, this piece of paper, it would come out and the text would all be backwards. So he put the money in and he was like, oh, it's come out backwards. So he put the backwards money and it came out like normal. And what did he do? He made a shitload of money. And what happened? The money ended up melting. But I always think back to that when I think of these conversations. I think back to that. We're all kind of greedy. You give us a big red button in our bedroom. Nobody knows, Joe. You can print some money. You're probably going to print some money. And you're doing it knowing you're increasing the money supply. You know you're going to socialize the losses. But, it's a little red button in your bedroom. And so, of course, government are going to use this. Of course, they're going to fucking use this.
Yeah, because even if they're not even if they think they never will, there will be something that happens that precipitates the use of it.
Look, don't get me wrong. Earthquake, natural disaster, I empathise with the big red button, even though many people tell me even in those scenarios it shouldn't be used. I empathise with that. It's not being used for that now.
But even in those scenarios, Pete, the only reason they would need to press the big red button is if they can't allow asset prices to fall. Because if you take
I see your point.
If you take away that big red button, you're back to the free market system. Absent, I'm going to put government regulation and interference in a box and just ignore that for now, because that obviously corrupts it further. But in a free market, prices should be allowed to move to reflect demand and supply. When something happens, prices should fall.
Fair.
Right. They'll fall far enough that people unlock their savings and then start to invest again. That's just a free market. They cannot be allowed to fall because of fractional reserve banking, because of this stacking of debt, typically against assets. And your leverage. So it only takes a small amount of decline in an asset's value to start eroding this. And as soon as it starts eroding it just collapses. So and this is why when we see, when the economy has a mini heart attack for some reason, asset prices start falling, stock market starts falling, people start calling for the big red button, typically from the banks, right? It's because the capital base is so narrow at the bottom, it gets eroded very quickly, and then you're in spiral territory, and the bank then is forced, the government is forced to press the big red button to bail everyone out. And this is why we're not in a free market. This is the entire thing. But it's because the big red button exists. If you take the big red button away, free market forces kill those people who take too much risk too soon.
Alan Farrington said you can't have capitalism with fiat money. This
Correct.
is not capitalism.
It's not capitalism at all. But it's held out to be capitalism, and therefore people who are anti-capitalist point at the system and say capitalism doesn't work. We're not in a capitalist system, we're in a socialist system.
And I'm kind of empathetic to them. I'm kind of empathetic to the socialists who have their own personal issues with capitalism, because it isn't a capitalist system.
It isn't a capitalist system, but they would tell you it is. So it's that misunderstanding and the obfuscation of what's actually happening here. We have socialism as the heart of the system, and theft is the heart of the system, which corrupts everything. So you can't build capitalism on top of that.
It's funny because even the people the capitalists who think we're in a capitalist system, and the commies who think we're in a capitalist system, actually a lot of them are identifying the same problems, even though ideologically they're very different.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is why the abstraction of the big red button is nice, because it's like, it just shouldn't exist. It shouldn't exist. And if it didn't exist, we would be in a free market capitalist system where people would see the benefits of being in a free market capitalist system, because the quality of life would increase. And this is where we sort of should link it back to the concept of energy money, right? Because, well, firstly, no government is ever going to give up access to a big red button, because why would you? If you have one in your bedroom, you wouldn't hand it over voluntarily. Right? But for the very first time, we are now in a position where there is an alternative.
And by the way, every single person I know who has moved over to the alternative has benefited. No one's left. No one says to me, I was in Bitcoin, I've lost interest and I've sold it all and I'm not here anymore. That doesn't happen, because they're all benefiting from a sound money standard. And this is the point of the interview where, like, some people listening and, I don't want to hear about this Bitcoin thing. And that happens, I mean, for a range of issues. I was chatting to a guy the other day, he said, I'm too late. I said, well, I'm not selling. People think they're too late, or they don't understand it, or they just don't want to go near it. Like, because Bitcoin doesn't have a great brand amongst a lot of people.
It doesn't.
But it's the literal solution.
It is literally, and it doesn't necessarily have a great brand because it is the solution. Because it doesn't have a marketing department. It doesn't have a CEO. It doesn't have any organization behind it whatsoever. And therefore, when you have something that comes into existence, which poses a a very explicit threat to the big red button, what the population tends to get told by those connected to the big red button is this thing is used by criminals, this thing's destroying the planet, this thing is XYZ. Because they don't want to succeed. But the reality is, it's an opt-in network for everybody, and
nothing stops this train.
Nothing stops this train on many different fronts. But I would encourage people to make that connection with, and hopefully I'll help you make this leap as well, with the thing about what money really is. Money really is just your economic energy. And to think about all the downstream issues that we see today with obesity and homelessness and all of these things, these do come as a direct result. All these issues that Gary's Economics and these people are talking about on the radio shows, they are all downstream of the corruption of the money. And so watch the video, and it will, because we haven't covered all of those today, but you'll see where they come from. And they are consistent. All right, so what is the solution? The solution is you've got to take away the big red button. And you end up with a perfect money when nobody can print any more of it without doing work. So you restore that link to energy. So gold was just really inefficient energy money. You have to expend a lot of energy to get it out of the ground, but then it's, super wasteful in terms of the way you do it, the time, the effort, the consistency, all the issues that we have with gold as commerce, as an economic battery for commerce, still remain. That's why it was replaced with paper, because it was just easier. But the next evolution of hard money, and the final stop for hard money, is just pure energy. Pure energy. And then people would say, and we can come back to this in a little bit, but isn't that destroying the planet? And the answer is absolutely not. We'll come back to it in a minute. But Bitcoin is just the purest form of energy money. There is a fixed supply that is coming into existence over time for the next 100 years. And the only way to mine Bitcoin in the same way that you would mine gold is by expending energy, but you expend it in the purest possible form. It's the only thing you're doing. You're not destroying the planet while doing it. You're actually solving the energy crisis while you do it. You're the solution to the energy crisis, not the problem.
We'll do a second show when we get into the technical and the weeds for people, because I just think it's too big a leap. I've done it with people. It's too big a leap. Trying to get into mining is too big a leap. I think I kind of want to focus more on this kind of the basic principles of why, if I have pound coins here, and Bitcoin here, if I am somebody who is only in the pound coins, why should I consider Bitcoin? Because look, the great thing about Bitcoin is there's nobody who doesn't know it exists. Yeah. You get in a taxi and somebody says, "What do you do?" "I'm a Bitcoin investor," or they'll ask questions because they've heard of it, they know of it. But so many people haven't made that leap. They're getting their pounds at the end of the month. They know that inflation is an issue. They understand there's problems in society. There's people like you and I go, "Well, the solution is Bitcoin. You should put your money in Bitcoin." Again, and they're saying, "I'm too late," or they don't understand it. What have you had success with of getting people to just take that leap? Suddenly go, because I took a leap, you took a leap, Connor's taken a leap, Kurt's taken a leap. Yeah. But like, what have you had success with getting people to take that leap and go, I'm gonna just spend a bit of time learning about this?
Well, watching the videos are great. Watching the videos is a great start. But I would go back to what you said before. You don't keep money in the bank. Why don't you keep money in the bank? Because the purchasing power is going to zero. Pounds are going to zero. The euro is going to zero. The dollar is going to zero. You all already know this. This is why I don't keep money in the bank.
So that's a good starting point. If they understand this, that's a great starting point.
Yeah, but people intuitively understand this.
Yeah.
Right, so if I'm using a currency that I know is going to zero over time, it forces me to find a better home for my economic energy. And so you buy a second house or you invest in the stock market, these different things. But they're just really inefficient ways of doing it, and you don't own them. You buy a second house with leverage And then you've got council tax, you've got all these extra things, stamp duty. It's attached to the ground. You say there's something the government doesn't like, you lose the home. The asset can be confiscated at the whim of the government. You buy a stock market, it's a promise, it's a piece of paper. It's stacked on promises. You don't even know which institution it's in. Right? You don't own the thing, but you're using it as a proxy store of value for your economic energy. You go, well, okay, if I'm trying to get the cleanest store of my economic energy, maybe I'll just buy gold again, because that will hold its value through time. But gold's still being mined at 2%. When the price of gold goes up, the gold miners raise more equity to dig more, to be able to access those deposits that we know are already in the ground. They just were previously uneconomical to extract. So the supply then goes up and the price comes down. And you also don't own it, because you can buy a small amount of gold. As soon as it becomes big enough, you don't want to keep it in a house anymore. You're worried about security. So you go and put it in a vault to give you a piece of paper. You've got a promise again. And so the government, with a stroke of a pen, can confiscate that in the same way they did in the US. And so you're sort of solving for two different things. It's like, how do I save my economic energy in an efficient way? And how do I actually own it? Right? The final stop on both paths of logic there is Bitcoin. It's the only thing you can own. Only thing in the world you can own. It's the only absolutely scarce asset in the entire universe. Gold is going to go up 2% a year forever, until we find an asteroid, and then God knows how much the supply goes up, right? Because the supply is infinite. Bitcoin supply is fixed forever. You produce more of it through expending energy, and you hold it yourself. You can carry it in your head. Nobody can take it off you. Nobody can stop you sending it or receiving it. It's perfect money. It is the end state of the natural evolution of money, from the shells we started with that represented our economic energy, all the way through to gold and Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the final stop here, and everybody is going to wake up one day to that realization. We're just on different points of the journey. Now, everyone's already started because they know they can't keep the money in the bank. And the process ends naturally with Bitcoin. Now, you've got a second. So that's one aspect. And that would be good enough by itself if Bitcoin was fully monetized. Because we talked earlier about your benefit of owning Bitcoin has been on two things. One, it protects your purchasing power because it's hard money. You're not printing anymore, but you're benefiting from the monetization. And by monetization here, I mean, what percentage of the world's value does Bitcoin represent? In a scenario where you had perfect money and you didn't need to store value, you didn't need to use any other asset as a proxy store for your economic energy because you had something that was 100% efficient, you wouldn't be storing your wealth and your purchasing power, your economic energy in other things. You just use that, right? You wouldn't be using anything else as a proxy. At that point, it's fully monetized. It represents the wealth of the world, and people use it as their both money and currency, because it's one and the same thing again, to transact with each other for goods and services. That's fully monetized. Bitcoin is much less than 1% of all the value in the world, but it's the natural end state for everything.
And so, great investment thesis.
But this is exactly what it is. Exactly what it is. To think that we are late to Bitcoin is to not see the big picture. Not see the big picture. We are 2 trillion on an asset base of 900 trillion. Gold is 10 times bigger, and Bitcoin outperforms gold on every single measure you could care to evaluate it.
See, and the thing is, what you're saying here is there are plenty of people out there who understand the problem because they're not keeping money in the bank, and they're buying second houses or equities, and they're understanding there's a problem, and their solution is a bunch of different investments, yet they're missing this one still.
They're going through that chain of logic.
Yeah.
But I think what your audience in particular, they're going to over-index on critical thinking. Hence why they're watching you and not watching something else. And they're already questioning their ability to be sovereign or self-sovereign from a rules and regulations, government interference perspective. There's a lot of commonality there, I would assume. Bitcoin is the end state for that in asset form, in money form. It's the only thing in the world that can make you self-sovereign. There's nothing else. And so it's just about how far you are down that chain of thinking, but we know where everyone ends up. And once you end up there, you never go back because you understand why you arrived there in the first place and nothing has changed.
Well, I think so. For example, I think when people buy houses, they intuitively understand houses go up in fiat value forever. They kind of intuitively understand.
But they don't understand why.
Yeah, but they understand. It's like they know. Like I know my dad's first house he bought was like $3,000. Mm-hmm. That same house today would be $300,000, and so we know it's not necessarily increased the wealth, but we understand that it goes up. It goes up, and they think, oh, this goes up, and I can sell it one day, and if I've got it for 2 decades, it's a nice retirement thing. I think one of them a lot of people don't understand is Bitcoin goes up forever as well.
Frame of reference is super important. Because when you say it goes up, the house goes up when measured in fiat.
Yes.
Right. When measured in Bitcoin, it's going down. And so if your default is, I'm measuring my wealth in fiat, you are becoming wealthier on paper. You're probably losing as a percentage of all the fiat.
Yeah, but measuring in terms of Bitcoin, that's post orange pilling.
But this is the point I'm making. So you're scoring something in something which is being inflated. So you've got more fiat, but there are just more fiat in total. Your percentage of the pie is declining, right?
Yeah,
but the number goes up. So it's like this mental clash. Whereas if you switched your worldview and your default of I'm measuring my wealth in Bitcoin, suddenly all those asset classes that are not Bitcoin now look like terrible investments. Because every year, or every few years, Bitcoin is volatile, but volatility is good and a skewed asset. We can come back to that. You see house prices decline over time when measured in Bitcoin. And then suddenly, when people have been using those assets as a proxy store of value, if they start going down in Bitcoin, you realize they're not a store of value at all. They're costing me money. I don't want to own a house. I don't want to own the stock market. I don't want to own gold because they're losing money. They're becoming worth less Bitcoin in time. And so what happens is you sell them and you buy Bitcoin.
Sell your chairs.
Yeah, but it's this frame of reference that you sort of by going down the rabbit hole, you make that leap because it is such a mental 180 from what we experience around ourselves today. But it's what is happening. And so when I talk about that monetization going from 2 trillion to 900 trillion, it's 900 trillion, and the allocation of those 900 trillion between 20 trillion in gold or 100 trillion in real estate, 100 trillion in the stock market, and 300 trillion bonds. I'll get the numbers slightly wrong, but broadly speaking, or collectibles. These things are worth those amounts because they've been monetized, because you can't keep the money in the bank. So you buy a collectible, you buy the stock market, you buy a house, which inflates them when measured in fiat, right? But then when you start to realize, actually, I'm losing money when measured in Bitcoin, you start selling them. So those asset classes become demonetized in favor of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin accelerates to become the default money of the world. No. That is a massive leap.
No, let me tell you a brilliant Connor story. I was so proud of him. So we're driving along the other day, and I'd been talking about just getting a second house, like thinking about retirement, and got a little bit of loose cash. I thought, well, I could maybe buy a couple of houses. By the time I retire, they'll be paid off, and there'll be a rental income because I probably won't be doing this. And Connor was just like, "Yeah, but Dad, should you just buy Bitcoin?" And he was so right. And I kept convincing myself I should be buying houses. I was like, "Yeah, but shouldn't you buy Bitcoin?" And but what I realized, there's still this only small part that worries about the existential risk to Bitcoin, whether it's government or I don't know, quantum computing. Because if that happens, like I'm done. I'm broke because everything's in Bitcoin. But what I think most people is that small slither of doubt I have, theirs is much bigger. theirs is like maybe half a cake or a slice of cake where they're like, yeah, but because they don't understand it. They think, oh, yeah, it's just a bubble. It's going to go away, or it's going to go to zero. I'm too late. And I think that slice of cake gets smaller and smaller and smaller the longer you're in it, because you learn more. We're trying to get people when it's like half a cake for them, a whole cake for them. Does that analogy work?
Yeah, I think it works.
That was a metaphor, was it?
Yeah, it's a journey. It's a journey for everyone.
Yeah,
and I'm still on that journey as well. I haven't reached Jeff Booth's level of Bitcoin Zen yet. But I hope that's in my future. But it's a journey for everyone. But it's a set of critical thinking. Everyone knows this already. They've just got to think about, well, if this, then that, then that, then that, and go down that, connect the dots, and take it to its natural conclusion. There is existential risks in everything. That's certainly true in the fiat system. Bitcoin is the only thing.
There's an existential risk right now within the fiat system. The level of debt is an existential risk.
Yeah, we know it's going to zero.
Yeah, we can become Argentina here.
We are becoming Argentina in slow motion. And to go back to your example of being in Argentina, because people struggle with, well, if I buy Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes up, I will be able to sell it and get more fiatellos again. Maybe like, okay, but it's hard to get them to the point of understanding when you buy it, you'll never actually want to sell it. Once you understand why you hold it, you will never sell it. And the example I use is actually from Lebanon, but it applies equally to Argentina. Is like if you went to the person you met in Argentina who spends 30% of their time getting rid of the peso for the dollar, and you said to him, when the pesos have gone up a lot when measured in dollars, when are you going to take some profits on those dollars and move them back into pesos? He's going to look at you like you're a crazy person. That's such a nonsensical question.
But you're making the same point here about pounds.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, you're totally right.
Exactly. It's just slow motion. It's just slow motion. And I was fortunate enough to get invited after the video went out, and Michael Saylor kindly shared it with millions of people, the world. I was invited to go and speak to the strategy staff. And strategy is the big US biggest corporate holder of Bitcoin globally, and they wanted to try and encourage more of their staff to learn about Bitcoin because they were a software company first before becoming a Bitcoin company. And he said, can you just come and talk to people and try and encourage them to learn about Bitcoin? And so I went and I talked to them about how I think about their company. And I gave them a historical reference. And it links strongly back to this, and it's about speed of things that are happening. And the example I gave them was between 1919 and 1923, there was a guy in Germany called Hugo Steins who became the richest man in Germany over a 4-year period. He ended up owning around a third of the German economy, right? 4,500 companies.
Is that the Michael Saylor at that time?
Well, this is the historical context. Now, what he realized is after the end of the First World War, in 1918, one mark was worth one gold mark, but they had access to a big red button, and they had debts to pay.
Big debts. And
so they not just hit the big red button, they absolutely smashed it. And over 4 years, it went from 1 to 1 to 1 to a trillion. Right? And he could see what was happening, but he has access to financial markets because he was already an established businessman. And so he borrowed as much money as he could in the marks and bought hard assets. He bought industrial companies, he bought commodities, he bought these things. And what happened is the government kept smashing the big red button, printing more of the things that he had borrowed. The purchasing power of the things he borrowed went to zero. He effectively wiped out all his debts because he owned the hard assets. And he just did the same thing over and over again for 4 years and owns a third of the economy.
Well, that's what Mauricio from Nedden did in Venezuela. He got the biggest loans he could get.
There you go. But that happened over a 4-year period. Right? It's taking us 50 years. The outcome is the same. the outcome is the same because they have the big red button and they are pressing it. They're just pressing it at 8 to 10% a year, not 100% a year. That's the only difference. And so the countries that are being inflated, having their currencies inflated away at 20, 50, 100% a year, see 8 to 10% a year and think that's great, I'll just get some dollars. I'm still losing, but I'm not losing at the rate I was losing. But the people who already own dollars or pounds or euros think 10% a year, that's horrendous. Right? I need to get into the next quality asset.
XRP. Got a fucking message about it yesterday.
I didn't expect XRP to come up in this conversation. For anyone in doubt, absolutely not XRP.
Absolute shit.
Absolutely not. But the conclusion is a hard asset, and then when you go down that route, the outcome is Bitcoin. And so the reason I bring that up is it's about that speed. So this is just Germany after the First World War, but just taking 50 years. But it's starting to accelerate, and there's no way out. There's no way out. And so, when you have the Doge efforts, for example, in the US, that's great, but it's only ever temporary sticking plaster. And you can see the outrage from people around all the misallocation of resources and the extra, the 14 extra money printers they found in the US. They don't actually know how much money they've printed. You see the outrage around.
Hold on, what's that?
There was a video probably a month ago with Elon Musk talking with one of the US politicians, and they found 14 different computers that were able to create extra money on demand, right? For various governmental services, but they didn't quite know how much money had been printed.
Fucking insane.
But the fact that you haven't seen this, hasn't been outraged, is shocking. But the Doge movement itself has begun to wake people up to the misuse of funds. But this is like a tiny aspect. But if you zoom out, like the whole thing is misuse of funds. The whole thing is misuse of funds.
Well, there is a big kind of philosophical conversation to be had, and we probably can't do it justice today, but if you're right, which I think you are, what we're heading towards is this separation of money and state, which is a huge concept to get our heads around, because there's nobody alive who hasn't really, everyone has always lived under government control and money. And if we're right, they can't control Bitcoin. And so we move to a society where government doesn't have the red button anymore because everyone uses Bitcoin. And that is the dominant financial system. Well, we might still have gold and commodities, and some people might try and do fiats, but eventually we get into a separation of money and state, and there's a big philosophical conversation to have about, well, what does that mean? How does that reshape society? I mean, we will naturally go back to more free market, lower regulation, etc. But I think people would be scared of that concept, this idea that government would control money, that government would be smaller. Government aren't here to save you anymore for every fucking little problem you have.
It is scary because it's so different from today. But it will be a gradual thing. It's already becoming a gradual thing. Bitcoin isn't. Everyone individually can separate money and state, and it doesn't take a lot of people to make that leap for things to start to change. And you already see this in the US. We now have an administration that is pro-Bitcoin. It has Bitcoiners in the administration, and part of the reason is Trump was pro-Bitcoin, and the Democrats were vehemently anti-Bitcoin, and being anti-Bitcoin doesn't win you any votes. No one, but being pro-Bitcoin wins you lots of votes, because I'm a one-issue voter. You may well be a one-issue voter. There's lots of one-issue voters. Yeah. But if somebody came out in the UK and said we're
probably, well, it depends. If it was the Labour Party, no, I wouldn't vote for them.
All right, fair enough. Who is genuinely a one-issue? Genuinely.
If Reform came out and said, we are pro-Bitcoin, we want to reduce size of government, we want to remove capital gains on Bitcoin, I'd be like, of course you got my vote. Of course, because I know you're accelerating us towards what is the end goal for society.
It's the genuine positioning of moving towards Bitcoin, right? Which is the key thing. And people are a one-issue voter because everything else is just downstream of the money. if you fix the money, you fix the world, as Bitcoiners say. Right? And this video helps understand, put some meat on the bones there as to why people have confidence saying that, because it's absolutely true. Because everything is downstream of the money. So you fix the money, nothing else is important, right? Everything else will resolve itself if you just fix the money. And so yeah, you end up being a one-issue voter. But this begins to sway elections. And Trump went broader in the US. He went to the crypto as well as Bitcoin, which is a very smart thing for him to do. And they've threaded the needle extremely well since on the creation of the Bitcoin strategic reserve, and the crypto asset stockpile seem to have kept everybody happy, which is a very hard thing to do. Yeah. But it's a playbook now for every political organization around the world. Is that Bitcoin wins elections. If you can capture 1-2% voter block completely from the opposition, that's potentially enough to win an election.
Isn't it ironic, really, where we were talking about Fiatello needing the big red button because he wants it to win elections, and he would use the flaws, well, I say the flaws in Fiat, but the benefits to him of Fiat to win elections. And politicians have done this forever and ever. We now have a better money coming along, and the incentive model's changed. That now the incentive is to promote the better money, which actually reduces government power. It's ironic, really.
But this is the beautiful outcome.
Yeah.
Is Bitcoin's a competitive advantage for everyone that embraces it. And you have the amount of Bitcoiners is only growing. And as that monetization is happening gradually over time, as you say, the value accretion to those Bitcoiners grows. It allows them to become more effective building businesses, being influential within government, feeling that they can actually change things. And, if every government in the world was packed with Bitcoiners, everything would naturally be a lot smaller. Because I've never met a Bitcoiner who thinks government should be bigger. Right? And so it's something that solves itself through education.
Hence why you made this.
In part. But I think this is a natural evolution now that we're going to see, because people will increasingly realize Bitcoin is a competitive advantage. And so next time there's an election in any country, they'll be looking at the US and thinking, that was a smart strategy. Right? And if I'm going to appeal to Bitcoiners, I should do some reading on Bitcoin. Right? Which then, and you can see the ball rolls and then you naturally get this improvement. Because to come back to the Doge thing, you cannot solve this internally. The US is insolvent. It is insolvent. You cannot lose 2 trillion a year, be 36 trillion in debt. In the future, 50 to 200 trillion, and think you're going to get out of that. There's no way to balance the books, and you've got a wall of debt ahead of you. The only way is just to repay it nominally by pressing the big red button, which just debases the currency. So the end game is already known. And, Lynn says nothing stops this train. It absolutely doesn't. It's going to zero in purchasing power. The only way out for governments is to work with Satoshi.
I wish I could get people to see the lives of Bitcoiners, because I talk about the first 4 years in Bitcoin as your tour of duty. You got to get through that first 4 years. You might be very lucky and start at the optimal point in that 4 years. You might have done it at 15K at the cycle, but you got to do that first tour of duty. You got to read the books, do the podcast. But once you've done 4 years, you don't go backwards. But everybody I know who has moved to a Bitcoin standard, their life has improved.
Yeah,
pretty much. I mean, there might be some examples. There's no mental health crisis amongst Bitcoiners. There's no health crisis amongst Bitcoiners. Every one of them has fixed the financial, the money in their life, and all the other problems have kind of melted away.
Yeah, but it's not just because the number went up.
No.
Bitcoin,
it's because the number didn't go down.
Well, even if the number goes down, I think the key difference is you're taking control.
Yeah.
You realize for the very first time the money is broken. And so your whole life up to this point has been built on a lie.
Everything is a lie.
Everything is a lie because
the food pyramid is a lie.
No, but you structure money is at the heart of everything. money is at the root of every decision, directly or indirectly. The way that you think about having a family, think about setting up your life, think about having a house, a career, it's all linked to the money. And so if your money is corrupted, every decision is corrupted. And therefore, I think a large swathe of society feels like they work ever harder and their quality of life either doesn't go up or declines.
Whereas Bitcoiners are out there having like 4 or 5 kids.
But well,
They are.
They are.
Whereas other people are like,
you
I can't afford a fucking kid.
Well, it's also having confidence in the future. When you take control of your own decision making, you give yourself firm foundations. You're like, I know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I'm not on a hamster wheel where someone else is setting the speed. I can make better decisions. My time preference is dramatically different. I think now in 10 years, not 1 year, because you can see what is happening to the financial system. You know it's going to zero. You know it's going to zero. There's no question. The purchasing power of the pound is going to zero because they have a big red button. It's going to zero. And so if you know that's happening, what happens on a weekly basis, daily basis, monthly, yearly basis, doesn't really matter because you know what's happening at the end. And so when you're buying Bitcoin, you're storing Bitcoin, you're saving your economic energy for the future, but you're also benefiting from this monetization as everyone else realizes the same thing is going to happen because we know what the end game is. The end game is fiat goes to zero. So whenever anyone asks me for a price prediction, I'm like, yeah, fiat's going to zero.
That's a great answer.
Because once you know it's going to zero, it's very clear. You've just got to own Bitcoin. Because in going to zero, the governments are going to take the assets of everybody.
Of course.
And you see this all the time with socialist states. The government can change the rules. They'll introduce a wealth tax. They'll asset seizures, or then print money, and they'll do the combination of all of those things until it impoverishes society. Impoverishes every individual in society. The only thing they cannot take from you is Bitcoin. And so if you have Bitcoin is the only thing you can own, it's the only absolutely scarce asset in the entire universe, everybody is going to own Bitcoin. Everybody. Okay? They just don't realize it yet.
Before we finish up, because that is fascinating endpoint, and we're going to have to do this again. There's so many things I've not touched on, but voices, you've probably heard it break a few times. How did this come about? Because I'm just fascinated because suddenly I was saying to Danny the other day, I was like, 2017, we got all these new people who came to Bitcoin. It's fascinating. 2020, we got all these new people who came to Bitcoin. It's fascinating. It hasn't really happened in 2024. Like this, there's not been this like new wave of people, apart from like yourself and maybe a couple more. I'm fascinated. Where did this all come from? Because it blew up.
It surpassed all my expectations. I just wanted a few people to watch it. I didn't realize it was going to tap into something quite as aggressively as it did.
But it's great production as well. Like you really went to town with this.
Well, my background, maybe I just fill in some of the gaps. Like many people within Bitcoin, it's from a structured background. So I did study physics at Oxford, then went to join Goldman Sachs. I spent 10 years as an equity derivatives
Physics
trader.
to Goldman Sachs, explain that.
It's not as strange as it sounds. There was a course in my physics. There was a module within my physics course, which was financial physics.
I love that.
And it was an optional one, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. If this is at the end of my second year, and I was like, that sounds cool, I'll do that. And it is going from Brownian motion, which is how molecules effectively move around in a gas or a liquid, going from there to deriving Black-Scholes equation, which is what underpins option pricing. And they won a Nobel Prize for that. And you derive that from first principles, and I'm like, that's super cool. And so I spent the summer then working in a pea factory in Hull, stacking boxes on a conveyor belt for half an hour and then having an option book for half an hour. And I spent the summer just learning everything about options and options trading. I was like, I want to do options trading. And then so applied to Goldman, and they took me, and then I spent 10 years doing that. Morgan Stanley and UBS towards the end. But my whole career has just been about risk, reward, and thinking in a non-linear way.
So when you discovered Bitcoin, it was just like...
Well, precisely. But between the derivatives trading, I then started modeling, initially as a bit of fun, started modeling sports from a mathematical perspective, like trying to work out the probabilities of events happening in football matches or cricket matches. So I left the city, built out an automated trading business, automated pricing and trading business with a co-founder. And then we grew that, started supplying bookmakers with better prices, better product, with real-time models on real-time.
Wouldn't you have been better off just betting against them if you knew the data?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't you have been better off just betting against the bookies if you had better data?
We did that for a while. But there's a cap on what you can do, because you always need someone to take the other side of the bet. And when you keep beating people don't want to take the bet anymore. But it's also a good way to demonstrate to them that you know what you're doing, and therefore they'll pay you for those services. And so we turned the business inside out and started supplying the bookmakers with better prices and models, and also creating new products like same game accumulators, where you have dependent outcomes. Liverpool to win, Salah to score, Liverpool to have over 10 shots, and Man United to get a red card. But allowing the user to create those bets in real time, because they're not independent outcomes. If Liverpool have 10 shots, it's likely Salah scores, it's likely Liverpool won, especially if United got a red card. And so you have to be able to do all this maths on the fly to God knows how many thousands of people in parallel. So we built these systems, and then we were acquired, and then we spent the last 5 years up to 2024 helping to grow that acquiring business into a global player today. But I found Bitcoin on the way. And so now I've been fortunate enough to take a step out of that business to focus on the only thing that matters, which is Bitcoin.
Go on, Joe. Well, listen, great to finally chat to you.
Oh,
we don't make many
Bitcoin
Bitcoin shows anymore, but if we do, it has to be someone who brings something to the table which helps a wider audience understand it. This is the point of doing the show now, is like we're getting into wider issues. People listening, go and watch What's the Problem. We'll stick it in the show notes. And Joe, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
I'm just ever so delighted to be here. So thank you for having me. And I hope it's been helpful for people at home. I realize there's some sort of bold conclusions here, but I would hope that you would watch the video, approach it with an open mind, and just reflect on what you already know to be true.
And buy some Bitcoin. And fuck the government.
Learn about Bitcoin.
Right, thank you for listening, everybody. We'll see you all soon. And sorry about my croaky voice, it's nearly better. Okay, see you soon. Bye.